if we want to be able to punch above our weight, to be able to truly assess products, to be able to feed into R&D, to create new products potentially, those are the kinds of things that require scale. I think I've said this before, many times, but having disparate little pots of data here and there is a losing strategy. And it's an easy strategy because everyone can get behind it, both the data holders as well as the data funders, but because it's small scale projects, but the reality is it's not enough. Hey everyone, I'm Costas.
And I'm Lester, and welcome to another episode of What's with RWE. Today we have a little bit of something different. We actually were attending a very recent conference called the CAPT Conference, or the Canadian Association for Population Therapeutics, the annual meeting that's hosted each year in Toronto. And this year was not essentially the same. And myself, Costas, and another colleague, Diana, attended it. So we're going to do a little bit of a special recap of the conference today with some clips from the actual conference itself. And then also finishing off with me and Costas's basically what we thought were highlights and what we thought, some of our thoughts around it as well. So actually, maybe jumping to you, Costas, we've talked about this a couple of times in the past. How have you've been around the block? You know a thing or two about how economics, and on top of it, the long history within Canada from that perspective. And anything that you can educate everyone on sort of the importance of this conference and then sort of its evolution over the years that you've seen.
Yeah, so this is a conference that was one of the core conferences that I used to go to every year as a graduate student. I was at U of T in the graduate pharmacology program. Did very little bench work, to be honest. My focus was on health economics and really focusing on therapeutics, specifically on drugs. But this was one of those conferences that at the time, if you worked on health economics, epidemiology, specifically pharmacoepidemiology, you went to this. So all of sort of the mentors that have sort of brought this new generation of researchers to the forefront, would have been there at that time. I honestly had almost a 20-year gap between my last time and my first time going back to this conference, which was I think 3 years ago, returning to it. And I will say that it's a little bit different. I do recall it being a little bit, I say a little bit more broad. It definitely was a much bigger focus on research. I think it has evolved into a forum for discussing policy, I think, more than the research, although we did get to see a really nice research piece looking at the ability to actually conduct outcomes-based agreements using data sets, and that was actually a really nice opportunity to see some primary research being done and presented at the forum. But that said, yeah, I think it's a nice evolution. I think it's relevant to today. And the sort of the heavy research side has sort of split off and continues to attend places like ISPOR, which is the International Society for Pharmacoeconomic and Outcomes Research, as well as ISP, the International Society for Pharmacoepidemiology. So if you really want to dive deep into the research side, you're probably going more to one of those conferences. But from a policy standpoint, I think CAPT has evolved to a place where it's open and welcoming of researchers, of biopharmaceutical companies who tend to be the ones that are generating a lot of the evidence, as well as the sort of political and more to the point, a bureaucratic side of the government that is having to interpret evidence and make policy decisions based on it. So I think that's a really nice evolution for it, bringing a lot of the stakeholders together in one place.
Yeah, I agree. That's the thing that I enjoy very much about this conference as well. This is only my second time attending the conference. Last year was my first, and it was like the other folks they also included were the patient groups, right? Patient advocacy groups. I wish actually more went, but there are obviously quite a few that we knew that were there. Like Joan, our good friend that comes on our podcast from time to time, she was there, and others. Actually, we spoke with a patient, a colorectal cancer patient, that shared his story, which was amazing. Steve, right? And yeah, I would say that's something different than a lot of the other conferences. It's a little bit more tight knit, a little bit smaller, despite still being probably a couple hundred people, but it's still much smaller than some of the ginormous ones we've been into in the past. So you really have a really good amount of a conversation and dialogue amongst like all the different types of stakeholders that are part of this healthcare ecosystem.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that the patient aspect of it, and I think the goal was to really ensure that that patient voice was at the table. I think it had to do with a little bit of the focus this year on rare diseases, but I think irrespective of the focus, the goal of having a patient voice at every panel, at every table, really is one that I think is important, especially at this point where Canada is, where we're talking about national pharmacare. We're talking about very significant changes to the potential policy framework for how do we deliver care in provinces and how do we do that in a sustainable fashion. The patient voice has to definitely be part of that discussion, and kudos to CAPT for ensuring that occurred this year.
Absolutely. And kudos for Cap for experimenting here a little bit and letting us actually conduct our podcast actually at the conference. So for those of you who probably weren't aware, when we attended the conference, we actually Costas reached out to Cap and asked for permission to do a little bit of filming just to get a little bit of give everyone here, the audience, an inside scoop of what this conference is like. So we went around and actually interviewed quite a few of both the attendees and obviously the individuals who did presentations. We also had a couple of interviews with the outgoing president, Julia Shen, and also incoming president as well, Adam. So it was just a fun time. And before we jump into the clips, I do want to say that, thank again the CAP organizers for allowing us to conduct our podcast over at CAPT. And also on top of that, being, of course, we're very supportive of CAP, and we were this year's first Ruby sponsor. So a little highlight there as well, a little bit of self-serving there. However, it's they told us that we were the only ones, the first and only ones, and hopefully in the coming years, many more nonprofits will come to the conference as well and lend their voice.
Yeah, nonprofits, patient groups, they would all fall under that category, and it really is a way to show that you not only support CAPT, but obviously there's value back for the organizations themselves as well, and for everybody who takes the time to watch this or skim through the different stories and different questions that we asked. Leave us some comments below. Tell us what you thought, and what we should be doing next time, because I think people liked it. So hopefully we'll be able to replicate this not only at CAP but maybe at some other meetings in the upcoming year. So we'd love your feedback on what you'd like to see next time around as well.
Great. So without any further ado, let's go straight to the clips.
Hey everyone, so I'm here with Adam, our incoming president for CAPT. We just wrapped this iteration of it. Terrific meeting so far. Just wanted to get your thoughts, any takeaways from this meeting, and any thoughts you're looking forward to for next year.
Thanks for having me on your show. I guess maybe I'll share my vision for CAPT moving forward. I see CAPT as a place where all of us, whether it's people living with disease, government, HTA, researchers, clinicians, industry, consultants, we can all come together and discuss challenging topics, discuss the need for good quality data to inform decisions, and just have these discussions and debates, but in a very respectful and helpful way to improve the health of Canadians.
Well, I've been a long time CAPT person. I had a little 20-year hiatus in between the two, but I'd say you're well on the way. This was an incredibly broad group of individuals here. And I think the topics that are being discussed, they're real world, they're topical, and they are looking forward rather than looking back. So congratulations. Any one thought from this meeting, the one takeaway for people?
Oh, that is so hard. But I do like all of the sessions. If you look through it's still live, like the list for the day, all the panels, there's a good theme through all of that. But I like how it tied together at the end around the implementation. Like you can talk about decisions and trying to find value in therapeutics and getting them to people. But if we don't actually get them to people, then it's all moot. You lose it all. So
wonderful, Adam. Thanks so much. Good luck.
Hello, we're here again. Now at CAPT, and the sessions are over, but we were able to grab one of our favorite people, Amyn. So Amyn was on a panel discussing the recent ASCOT study that they published in collaboration of others like Winston Chung and so forth, right? And Amyn, you talked a lot about how the ASCOT study was great. It showed that we can actually conduct OBAs from at least the data is there to be used. Now, what do you think is sort of the next step for yourselves? If you were to kind of continue to study, or should we just jump right into like implementation? Like what is next for post ASCOT?
Yeah, great question. So one, just for your quick context, ASCOT was a study in small cell lung cancer where we looked at the ability to be able to collect data from Alberta to be able to actually show that we could capture overall survival as well as time to next treatment to support an outcomes-based agreement. If you remember, this is one of the big issues, right? Is that there's been a lot of conversations around can we use RWE for OBAs. We showed with Dr. Winston Chung and the data from Alberta that we can use data to be able to support outcomes-based agreements. This was a mock OBA. This was, we were trying to first determine can we look at the data infrastructure and make this happen. We showed that we can. Next step then is really, if we were to move this towards an actual OBA, there are two things we would do. One, make sure we've got patients and payers on board to be able to ensure that the outcomes we're collecting are absolutely relevant to these key stakeholders. So that's one. One more I would add is think about doing it in another province so that we can validate the data from Alberta and show generalizability.
That's right. Thanks a lot.
Bonjour, donc on est à la conférence CAPT qui a lieu à Toronto en ce moment, et on est avec Rose Gagnon qui vient de l'Université Laval, donc et on voulait comme juste savoir un peu de ce qu'elle étudie, c'est quoi les intérêts d'être ici dans la conférence aujourd'hui. Donc merci beaucoup de parler avec nous, Rose, c'est un plaisir de te parler. Tu as donné une super bonne présentation aujourd'hui, puis on voulait juste savoir qu'est-ce qui t'a amené à venir à la conférence, c'était quoi le message que tu voulais donner, et aussi de nous parler de ton parcours, ce que tu étudies. Je sais que tu es étudiante en PhD en physiothérapie, n'est-ce pas?
En fait, je suis physiothérapeute de formation, mais mon projet de maîtrise était plutôt clinique. Puis, pendant que j'ai fait, c'était d'implanter une offre de service à l'urgence. Puis, je me suis rendu compte en implantant cette offre de service-là que j'avais envie d'en savoir plus sur le côté plus économique des choses. Donc, j'ai pris un cours à option un peu par hasard à l'Université Laval en économie de la santé. J'ai eu un coup de foudre pour la matière. Puis, j'ai décidé de changer à 100% mon doctorat, de tourner tout ça de bord puis de dire, bon, finalement, je me spécialise en économie. Wow. Du jour au lendemain. Puis j'ai commencé à me former et tout, puis à vraiment m'intéresser, ce qui fait que j'ai un parcours un peu éclectique, mais ce qui m'amène maintenant aussi à avoir une vision plus macro du système de santé. Puis pourquoi est-ce que je m'intéressais à la conférence ici? C'est que je trouve ça important, peu importe le thème dont on décide d'aborder. On a parlé beaucoup aujourd'hui de mettre en lien les décideurs, les policymakers, d'essayer de mettre aussi en lien les gens qui font la recherche, puis les patients partenaires et tout. Puis je pense que peu importe le domaine de recherche, c'est ça qui est le plus important pour prendre des décisions qui sont éclairées puis avoir les meilleures politiques possibles implantées dans le système de santé.
Oui, puis on a aussi un dossier ou un sujet qui est très chaud en ce moment, très trendy comme value-based care. Donc, ça, c'est vraiment, tu étudies la trajectoire du patient puis voir quelle étape on peut améliorer pour justement diminuer les coûts. Donc, ça, c'est un de tes domaines d'études aussi?
Oui, absolument. En fait, ce qui me passionne dans l'amélioration du système de santé, c'est vraiment l'optimisation du système, mais via le value-based healthcare, qui est pour $1 investi, quelle est la meilleure efficacité, quelle intervention donne la meilleure efficacité possible. Fait que souvent, quand on parle du système de santé, on a l'impression qu'il faut juste mettre plus d'argent dedans pour régler les problèmes, mais c'est un peu la mission que je me suis donnée de dire non, ben des fois, il faut prendre un pas de recul puis voir ben comment est-ce qu'on peut mieux utiliser l'argent qu'on a déjà mis, puis si éventuellement on a besoin de plus d'argent, on en mettra. Mais c'est ça, c'est un peu de... Puis, même si on reçoit beaucoup de services de santé, mais c'est pas toujours aligné non plus avec les guides de pratique clinique. Fait que quand on parle de value-based healthcare, c'est vraiment d'essayer de s'aligner justement avec les bons guides de pratique, d'avoir des interventions dont on a besoin, mais qui apportent une valeur dans notre processus de soins, puis pas juste recevoir des soins de santé pour recevoir des soins de santé.
Super. Félicitations. Merci beaucoup d'être avec nous aujourd'hui.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Hey everybody, here we are at day 2 of CAPT, and I'm with the outgoing president from this year, Julia Shen. And what we'd really love to know is your thoughts on some of the highlights from this meeting so far.
Great. Thank you for the question. It's honestly been my complete pleasure to be the CAPT president over the last year. I can't say enough great things about the board and what they've been able to do and what we've been able to accomplish. So this year's conference, we really wanted to aim it to find solutions for patients, or at least give patients the place to voice any of their concerns and have those meaningful conversations with other stakeholders or interested parties. So one goal of ours was to have at least one patient representative in every panel to have those discussions. And I think we were able to do that really well. We covered topics anywhere from rare disease, oncology. We just had a panel on autoimmune type 1 diabetes, and it goes to show some of these infrastructural challenges, right? And we know that these challenges have lasted forever, but how that reflects to the patient, I think that's been a really big eye-opener during this conference, especially for me. And I hope, when I pass on the presidency next year and even in future years, we continue this tradition, continue having these conversations, and maybe one day we'll have a solution.
Well, congratulations. It's been a terrific session today and yesterday, and we certainly saw the patient perspective coming through. So thank you very much for the work of the past year, and we'll see you in the future.
Thank you.
Hi there. Again, we're at the last day of the CAPT meeting, and we actually were able to finally pull aside Ian. He's like a really, really in-demand man, so it was really challenging grabbing him. But Ian, we spoke to Julia, who's the outgoing president, you as well as part of the board. I'm curious, just get your take on, there was a lot more emphasis on this patient-centered theme around getting the patient's voice into the overall, process, maybe the best way of thinking it. What is, for you, what is patient-centered? What does that mean to you? Yeah.
When we were putting this whole conference together, do you want me to hold it?
Oh, yeah, you can do that.
Sure, I can hold that too. Yeah. When we were putting the whole conference together, that was one of our central core themes to have, is to ensure that there was a patient on every panel if possible, to also incorporate some of their content in the panel discussions, even in the development of the topics. We always bring in, and one of our board members actually is taking it from the patient perspective as well. So we ensure that that was throughout the entire planning process, and it came out through what you saw so far in the past 2 days. So to me, it's just getting involved early, making sure that we're speaking to as many, and we want to be able to reach out to as many as possible, those who are either patients themselves or representing patient groups, to get involved. And again, from beginning to end, to be part of this conference.
Thanks. So if I have to maybe summarize that bit, is that, the call to action is really patient advocacy groups. You want them to be part of the conversation, and especially the next meetings and the following meetings. You want more and more of them to be part of this conversation. So thank you very much for all that you do, Ian.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Lester.
it. Thanks a lot.
Hey, Lester, we're here today with Steve Slack, who's a patient advocate for colorectal cancer. And we're at the Canadian Association for Population Therapeutics, and we're actually going to be talking a little bit about biomarkers and turnaround times and where they're at. So, Michael, I don't know if you want to start talking a little bit about your experience, your story, and how that sort of translates into what that means for biomarkers and how important that is.
Absolutely, yeah. So I was diagnosed stage 4 colorectal cancer in June 2021. And I had to have surgery right away for the resector of the tumor in my colon. But I was left with 23 tissue lesions on my liver, and so I had to start chemotherapy right away after the surgery. Of course, I met with my oncologist after recovering from the surgery. It would have been August of 2020. Started chemotherapy a week after, but he would have ordered the biomarker testing when I saw him. But of course, we didn't have those results. It took a couple of months. So it wasn't until probably 3 or 4 rounds of systemic treatment before I was able to get those results back, and it turned out that I did have targeted treatment available to me based on the results of the biomarker testing. So we were able to incorporate that additional drug, which is an anti-EGFR, into my treatments, and really had a really positive response, which, long story short, got me to a position where my 23 lesions went down to 1, stubborn one that just wouldn't go away, and had to make the decision to go for actually a living donor liver transplant, which I did in November of 2023. As a result of that, I am almost 1 year now, no evidence of disease. It was a tough procedure, but it was a successful one. I am left wondering if we'd received the biomarker testing results quicker, and I had been able to start an additional target therapy along with my chemotherapy right from the very beginning, like round 1. Maybe I could have had a complete response, or would have taken such a drastic step. Just had to go to liver transplant.
Congratulations, first of all. I think the question for us is, having gone through that journey, how should they self-advocate when it approach to testing?
That's a great question, and I'll tell you. So, because at the time, if I go back to when I was first diagnosed and I was dealing with this news, trying to struggle in the process, I didn't know. I hadn't heard of biomarker testing. I didn't know what biomarker testing was, what its importance was, or relevance was to me and my treatment for my cancer. I didn't know what questions I should be considering. What my advice would be is to find an advocacy group once you're diagnosed, like the group that I now volunteer with, CCRAN, Colorectal Cancer Resource and Action Network. They are such a critical organization as a nonprofit for educating cancer patients and helping them along their journey, making sure they're aware of all their treatment options and things that they should be asking their oncologist about. And so that would be my biggest learning, is I should have, as soon as I got my diagnosis, I should have looked for a patient advocacy group like CCRAN that supports people like myself with colorectal cancer, and that would have so better informed me along the way. But knowledge is so important. I mean, I wasn't a medical guy. My background, I was in finance, so my knowledge of medical and scientific stuff was just not there.
Thanks so much for your time, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Awesome. We're here today again with one of our special guests, actually, from a previous episode, Joan Holland, who is no longer the vice chair, now is the chairperson of PHA Canada. Right. So Joan actually gave a really awesome, she was on a panel yesterday that I attended as well on RWE Town Hall as part of this CAPT meeting. And actually in the morning session, the keynote speaker was speaking specifically about real world evidence, real world data, and how they're collecting that for a very specific disease. But I think Joan has some ideas about how we could potentially maybe even generalize it. Right. So Joan.
No, I was really surprised to listen this morning to the keynote speaker at the CAPT conference here. My understanding is that the neuromuscular disease registry is being used kind of as a prototype to understand how to build, because it's one of the best rare disease patient registries probably in Canada. It's being used as a kind of a prototype to build, understand how to build quality data and where to find that quality data and what to do to improve data that isn't what they would call decision grade. And while that was really heartening to hear, what I got out of that is if we can do that, if we can if if CDA is doing that with one rare disease registry, maybe we can expand that either to a national registry for all rare diseases. I think that would be really good. We could get some really good information across diseases about things that we might have missed by being siloed in our own rare disease organization. But it also, if we can't do that, which I still think is the best way to go, what that information can do for the rest of the rare disease organizations, if we can get that data so that we can use that as guidance for what we can do going forward to build our registries.
Great. Thanks a lot, Joan, and thanks for all the great work that you do.
No problem. Thank you.
Oh, great. So Costas, after interviewing so many attendees, panelists, it was just a good conversation. And I'm very, very thankful to everyone who actually was open to having Actually, we didn't have anyone reject us. So that's actually, some people thought it was good. They needed to really prep and do a lot of work. No, it was just, it flowed because it's something that everyone's very passionate about. They were speaking to a subject that they knew very well already. So, and they obviously have strong opinions about them. But, Costas, I don't know if you had any, just now myself and you, what were some of the highlights for you? And then obviously something that maybe you thought was missing in this year's CAPT that you would have liked to see.
Yeah, so I think the highlight for me was the very robust discussion around rare diseases. They've over the last 5 or 6 years, I think we've started to see the pipeline from rare, very niche companies bringing products, and actually even big companies bringing products for rare diseases into the Canadian marketplace. And governments have struggled to try to figure out, how do we pay for these? How do we make sure that the evidence supports their use, so that we're not just sort of feeding into the sort of needs of patients without vetting whether or not we're doing harm or we're doing good for those individuals. So it was good to have a discussion. I think we could have done a little more on the policy side of what does it mean to adopt these products. We focused a lot, I think, this year in CAPT on the data side. So using real world evidence to be able to track or to support the evidence base for decision making in the long term. It's a good place to start, but I think that that other piece is probably a good one to start to look at in the future, to think, how do we do this in a sustainable fashion? So I think that was my big takeaway, was rare disease is here, it's here to stay, and we need to figure out how to actually address it. I think, the one piece that I think could have been addressed a little bit more, because rare disease is one piece of the puzzle, but we know that national pharmacare is moving forward. It's in its infancy. It's very small. Its mandate is incredibly small at this point in time, but I foresee that mandate could potentially balloon very quickly. Right? I mean, we already talked about, well, what other products should be included in that particular basket of pharmacare supported products. So that's something that I think needs to be addressed sooner than later. Having a national formulary, how are those things going to be decided? How do what is going to be the mechanism for adding products onto that list, and potentially, when should they transition to, let's say, provincial formularies, or only be supported by the provincial formularies? So, that piece for me, I think, is the next big topic to address for a forum like CAPT. How about yourself? What were your takeaways and wish list?
For me, one of the big sort of, I'm going to kind of look at a very particular session or particular panel conversation, and all of them were fantastic and very insightful. The one that really struck me was the one around registries for rare diseases. Right, so this is that's a common theme throughout the entire CAP conference. It was very, very rare disease focused, right? And one of the sessions was discussing about almost like utility of registries. And the concept of a registry is, you basically have a database that houses data about, a specific patient and a patient cohort. So it could be, let's say, a rare disease registry for just because of our friend that always comes on a podcast, and also this time was in one of our interviews as well, Joan, right? Let's say use PHA as example, right? The Pulmonary Hypertension Association, they have a registry. The registry houses data that is about their specific the patients that suffer from PH. And then subsequently, the data could be about their name, their contact information. It could be about their disease, what type of drugs they had to go on, what was the outcome of those drugs. So that a registry just houses data from about basically a patient and characteristics around that specific patient. And the idea was for this panel was, we have there's tons of registries out there, right? Like how are they useful or not? And I thought that was a good conversation to have, because sometimes we just do things for the sake of doing things. And I thought all the panelists, they had a panelist from the health technology assessment body. For us, it's the Canada's drug agency. They had a patient advocacy group that PHA was there. The industry, so pharma was there as well. And also I believe a payer was on. I think it was Ontario Payer was on the. So I thought it was a good broad spectrum of the healthcare ecosystem, and then their input on a specific topic that's quite esoteric, but still a topic that impacts all of them. So I thought that was good. It was like a good setup. I like the setup of that type of a conversation. And of course, when they answer some of the questions from the audience, I thought it was really interesting. Some of them went really visionary in terms of ultimately what they wanted out of a registry, right? It seems like at the end of the day, what people really want isn't these separate registries, but really almost like one registry that's the data of all Canadians. And subsequently, if you want to do research of course, everything has to be, from a privacy perspective, has to be okay, and data security and all of the ethical. But if all those boxes are checked, then anyone should be able to do research on this data set, so that they, basically Canadians benefit from that, right? From these results and from these answers for these, let's say, questions about a specifically disease and how a drug is working in a specific population. So it was interesting to hear that was ultimately what everyone, because I feel like it's like saying the quiet part out loud, right? Like, I think everyone would like that, but I think people generally don't say that, because then you basically you may be upsetting one registry versus another registry, right? But it seems like everyone agreed.
I think that's the that's an important takeaway, right? Because you've got to take a look at where we're going. I mean, data may be bound by provincial boundaries today, but the reality is Canada is a small fish in a small pond, or the patients are small fish in a small pond, so to speak. If we want to be able to punch above our weight, to be able to truly assess products, to be able to feed into R&D, to create new products potentially, those are the kinds of things that require scale. I think I've said this before, many, many times, but having disparate little pots of data here and there is a losing strategy. And it's an easy strategy because everyone can get behind it, both the data holders as well as the data funders, but because it's small scale projects. But the reality is it's not enough. Now, there are people in the background, like you said, who are saying the quiet part in quiet rooms, trying to build sort of that vision of a shared infrastructure that would allow to have that access to sort of that broad swath of data in an ethical way to be able to do all of this. But until that becomes sort of the goal, the strategy out in the daylight, in public, with agreement, I don't think we're going to be any further ahead than we are today. I hear lots of people talking about, oh, but there's this project and that project and this technology, this and technology. It's not the technology, folks. Other countries, other markets are doing it. It's not the technology. It's the willingness. Are we willing to agree? Are we willing to work together? And do we know what that end goal should look like? What is it we want to get out of the data? I know what the patient groups want. I'm sure I kind of have a good sense what the payers want. But as a society, are we agreed on what we really want? Because that's the only way we get there.
Yeah, and this reminds me of a conversation me and you had quite a while, not even that long ago, maybe a year ago, around how you educate me on how we can really, how a small country can pump up above its weight, right? In that the example, I mean, not to get political, like not like we fall on one side or the other, but this was a fact, and this is what happened. Was when COVID was around and was at its really height, and people thought the world was basically going to end, right? And that the vaccines were, say, like the savior for everyone. And I don't know where we're not going to discuss where we fall on that line, but when that was the case, and a country like Israel, I think he's told me, they actually were able to mobilize incredibly quickly. And they actually, I don't know how large Israel is. Is it more than 10 million people? I should quickly look that up. But it's smaller than Canada in terms of population, besides territorially, but even population is much, much, much smaller, right? And they were able to obtain vaccines sooner from manufacturers. Maybe you could share that story just so that people understand like what it means to be able to come together and really do something large, and why, despite being a smaller population than our neighbors down south, you can really do something.
I think there's a lot of differences, and I'll chalk some of it up to sort of the social solidarity between sort of the citizens of Israel, what they want to get, what they want to do for each other, and what they want to get out of, their government, and what they need, right? But the underlying, sort of, to make it relevant to real world evidence, the underlying enabler in their case it really is a solid data platform, and a ability to access it, do research, task patients to different sort of to different treatments, and so on and so forth. So I mean, it is what we would love as from a national level to be able to have ourselves, but our federal sort of provincial sort of roles and responsibilities are not the same as Israel has between its federal government and any of the smaller sort of geographic entities within its boundaries. So that's I think for me the takeaway is, if we believe registries are part of the solution, then we need to look at it as a pan-Canadian solution, not as a provincial solution. And it needs to be articulated in such a way with what are those goals that we really want to see, whether it's research, whether it's to manage pandemics, whatever the case may be. And I know everybody's favorite word is fit for purpose when they talk about registries. But the reality is sometimes it's better to just have the sort of the single source that you can go to, and you can actually pull the data sets that you need to actually do your work, rather than recreate the wheel every single time for your fit for purpose concept or fit for purpose analysis. So, anyways, enough said there, though. I think we're all in agreement, and I think there's probably lots of folks watching who will say like, yeah, like we all say that behind closed doors. We just don't say it out loud. But so I agree. I think that discussion was a great discussion to have. So where did it sort of miss the mark for you, or what were you hoping more of for this conference?
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on it a couple of times here, is this idea of, like, say, fit for purpose, this idea of, okay, don't rock the boat. That's very, very Canadian of us, right? We're by and large very, very kind and nice to each other from as compared to maybe some other countries. So we have this maybe unfair stereotype that, or perhaps fair stereotype, that we don't like to rock the boat. And I would say that in this case, especially in healthcare, especially given the current times, I think it's something that we need to rock. primarily because, of course, healthcare spend is incredibly high. It's fair enough, right? And that's largely because the population is getting older as well, right? There's more people living longer, more and more diseases. And in order to hopefully come up with a new solution, we kind of can't just go with the status quo, and we need to rock the boat a little bit. And I think CAPT, this is one area where I can understand why they didn't go down this path, but it would have been nice to see a little bit more diversity of views on the stage to have this push and pull type of dynamic. Because largely speaking, everyone on the stage generally, especially on each individual panel topic, would generally agree with each other, which I guess makes sense actually, because they're part of the same panel. So they're like, it's a little bit kumbaya, right? Which is fair enough, right? I can understand that overall approach. It would have been nice to hear from, let's say, a topic. Let's say one of the topics was outcome-based agreement that was on the stage, and I think both myself, and yourself are fans of that type of arrangement. Moving at least as something that should be experimented with, or at least should be looked at in the Canadian context. But it would have been nice to get someone maybe that would have been on the opposite side, right? Like, hey, I think this is crazy. It doesn't make any sense, because then we understand, okay, these is where the concerns are from, like someone who's pushing back, right? Now we have to, as a group, if we do want to move this forward, we need to be able to alleviate those concerns. And that would have been something that would have been a learning experience for me to understand, because largely it seemed like everyone agreed on all by and large, everything, yet we very seldomly make any progress. And clearly, if we don't make progress, then that means there's something that's in the way. And not talking about what's in the way, I think also does us a little bit of a disservice as well. So that's something I think we also shared with the CAPT organizers as well, from a topics perspective. But I understand why they didn't go down it, like specifically want to drive sort of these contentious type of conversations or dynamics. I can see the fear in that. I understand why we wouldn't want to go down that route. But that's why I would like to be maybe a little bit more of.
Yeah, I think, you know what? I think being Canadian, it actually puts us in a good place, because disagreement does not mean that we need to be disagreeable, right? I think not wanting to sort of upset people is fine, as long as you're still able to convey your perspective. And I think that's really what we're looking for here, because I think without that sort of those different voices at the table, it's like bringing in the patient voice, right, around a reimbursement table. Without those different voices, you don't get to the best solution. I think that's for me one of the reasons to have those disparate perspectives on that same on the same panel, for sure.
Yeah, maybe next year they should. Our suggestions for one of the topics or one of the panel discussions be a combination of both of what you had said about national pharmacare and what I said about maybe a little bit of a contentious dynamic, or a little bit debate, like essentially a debate. It would be interesting if it was a national pharmacare debate on the next CAP. That just joins exactly what we actually talked about, which kind of be interesting to see.
You know, I think there's a lot of things that are on the table that are open, especially when we're talking national pharmacare, especially with CDA really taking much, a bigger role. Let's say having a renewed mandate to really look for value. You do have to start talking about those divisions of power. That's one of those questions. Maybe nothing is going to come out of it, but you have to start thinking about it. You have to just start looking at the way that we do value assessments in Canada. Full stop. Are we looking at it from the right perspective, or do we need to bring that value-based care concept a little bit more forward to the table? PMPRB, they're I think they're about to release their final revised guidelines, and they're very, very different than where they started off, pre-pandemic, probably for a good reason. But you can even put the question on the table: do we even need PMPRB anymore with a strong CDA process in place and a PCPA, pricing negotiator on the back end of that HTA review? I don't know, but I think these are the kinds of questions we need to start. We need to also start asking when we're talking about policy policy as one of the reasons for having this conference, and policy as one of the main focuses of the panels and the discussions that we have there. Let's tackle the big stuff. Let's put it all on the table, and let's get some different opinions to see what makes sense going forward. These are, I mean, those, especially some of those young students who were in the room and who had posters up. I know you managed to go see those posters during the reception. I mean, they're the future leaders. They're the future, decision makers, and I think they are sort of the young minds we need to start tapping into and start having these discussions and talking about what does the future look like, not just what it looks like today.
Yeah, we got to be a little careful. Maybe if we shake the tree too much here, we may actually rock the boat too much here. We may actually not get invited back to next year's CAP.
But no, they did a fantastic job.
Yes,
I don't mean to minimize it at all. They did a wonderful conference. Yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, this has been just a good conversation, great conference. And again, thank you very much to the CAP team for allowing us to just being supportive, actually supporting us in a small Canadian nonprofit doing a podcast about healthcare and data and intersection between the two and its importance for Canadians. So I'm glad they were very supportive of this. And again, thank you very much for that. And of course, if you like this format, please comment below, thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, give us feedback in the comments below. And of course, we actually have launched a blog page as well, that if you prefer to read about each individual episode about this podcast, you can go to our blog post now as well on Exactis Innovation. If you search for that on Google, you can do that.
Yeah. We'll provide the link below. Yeah,
that's actually a better idea. We'll provide the link below. But thanks a lot, everyone. Thank you. Have a great day, and yeah, have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye bye.